I assume that if you're watching this, you probably are questioning what exactly evolution is and how it even works. You might think it sounds like magic, but after this, I will assure you it will make as much sense as 1 plus 1. Let's get into it. First off, you might have heard this before, survival of the fittest. What does survival of the fittest mean and where did it come from? To start this off, I'll need to mention that the phrase survival of the fittest, this phrase was first introduced by a man named Herbert Spencer. It was made popular by Charles Darwin. So no, Charles Darwin wasn't who began the phrase. The phrase survival of the fittest is a great summary of what evolution is, and now we'll get to that. How does evolution work and why does it happen? Evolution is slow. It is just as fast and noticeable as every generation has mutations, which isn't very noticeable or fast. It also has no goal. The reason why mutation eventually causes evolution is because at some point of all species, they will get some change in their genes, which is technically different from the original. For example, humans, or also known as Homo sapiens, are part of the hominids species, also known as great apes. Kind of the same way saltwater crocodiles are a part of the crocodilian species. The reason you don't see other types of hominids is because of competition. Species have to compete to see who is a superior one, especially in their environment. And believe it or not, the natural world isn't very nice. While a competition happens, some eventually die. Just like some people are either born smarter or dumber, bad vision or good vision, tall or short, the one with the best genes eventually wins, therefore having their genes passed on to the next generation, which eventually becomes a new standard that gives the next generation a place to begin. And you can call this natural selection. The one downside of evolution and the competition of wildlife is that the stronger, smarter competitor of either different species or your species will eventually make the rest go extinct, which are normally the weaker ones. Which might be the reason why we're the only hominid left. Because we don't have much control of our genes if you're like the strongest or the weakest. Evolution is always inevitable. You either die or make the next generation standards. Can evolution be slowed down? And if it can it be sped up as well? Yes, the answer is yes. It can either be slowed or sped up. Natural selection mainly changes its speed depending on pressure and death rate. For example, it could either be competition or the environment. Like if the species has low pressure and low death rates, the weak will also be able to spread their genes. So there won't be as much change because it will either be probably a huge copy of the last generation, so not much will change because both the weak and the strong get to pass it on. But if there's more pressure, more death rates, or either change in the environment or more competition, then chances are the weak will die, so the toughest ones will spread their genes to the next generation, so the new generation has a new standard, and it will continue to be that specific standard or more, depending on how much time changes, so it will be sped up as well, because there is no weak to keep the species the same. So yeah, it changes depending on the pressure. If you already know something of evolution, you might have this question: how do species split? I previously mentioned somewhere in the past that the environment can also change the rate of evolution. For example, even though there are monkeys in South America, there's also some in Africa, and they all have different species which live in there. When an environment changes and the living beings inside are already used to their old ways, a lot of them die, and only the toughest ones which adapted can spread their genes. Now the next generation has to fight and compete with the competitors in the new environment, so that ones which most adapted genes continue to pass on. Eventually, the type of monkey which lives there has become its own kind. That's why there's so many species, because different environments have different things that need to be adjusted. Instead of worrying about the berry people in South Sudan eating them, they now have to worry about leopards. And once again, only the best of those can pass on their genes. This is something I sort of touched on. What happens to losing competitors? What mostly happens to losing competitors is sadly extinction. Extinction is inevitable, especially in Earth's history. You either make the next generation strong, or die, or make the next generation die. This is the reason natural selection works, why survival of the fittest phrase is important. But they can be somewhat saved. Interbreeding is sometimes a choice if two species are closely enough genetically. There is evidence that now extinct hominid Homo neanderthal was able to interbreed with our older species named Cro-Magnon, which led to us. But there's still a chance that isn't true. But even if it isn't true, other species could still do it. For example, mules and horses, lions and tigers, grizzlies and polar bears, camels and llamas, etc. But some can't breed, so yeah, that's one thing you have to worry about. Alright, this is a question a majority of you guys still might be questioning. Why is it still a theory? To understand why, you need to understand what's the difference between a normal theory and a scientific theory. A normal theory is mainly ideas that cannot be fully proven, but possible. In science, it's almost an exact opposite, actually. A theory in science is a fact or a highly supported idea. A good example of that is pretty much the point of theory of relativity. Many of the things of the theory are correct, but we can always add more, so it's not a fact. So in conclusion, evolution is still considered a theory because you can always add more to it. It is still new after all, and there's no way we learned everything about it already. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you now understand what evolution is and why it's one of the most approved scientific theories there are. I would recommend you to please subscribe and like and share.